We know for sure now it's important to practice. We know why we should practice. But the question is, how do we practice?
Okay, how do we practice is really dependent on the why again. So we're going to revert back to why, because this really is important. So we need to figure out why we're practicing first of all. Is it to maintain a competence? Are we practicing the same thing to maintain familiarity with some kind of procedures or some kind of response?
Could be?
Think of a fire alarm. We practice that often because we want to maintain familiarity. We're not learning something new. We know what to do. We just want to maintain.
Like refresh.
Refreshing. Yeah, absolutely. So that's some kind of refreshing practice. The other one is development or learning. So are we trying to develop a competence? Are we trying to develop an area? Or are we trying to learn something new? So we could be learning something new or developing a learnt skill already. So this is a little bit different from maintaining because we're teaching people something new. So are we now teaching a new procedure? Are we teaching them a new skill? Or are we building upon something that we've already learned before, but we're just adding a little bit more complexity to it?
Yeah, that was two of them. We got a third as well.
The third one. We absolutely do the third one. This is to test.
Yeah.
So why are we practicing? Well, the final one, and I think this is where we normally jump straight to. We do. We don't reverse engineer the problem. We jump straight into saying, we are testing this.
Yeah.
And this is the big one that we're all
The exercise leader get this horn in and they want to...
That's absolutely it. This is where we jump to straight away. And people always talk about the one exercise in the year. And I think we're going to break it down and explain why that's good, but we need to get the building blocks to get up to that. So are we testing, are we developing, training, or are we just maintaining something?
That's really good. Before moving on to how to do it, I also would like to add there that what gives us the possibility, if we go into like testing the system, we need to be close to reality, right? Because we want to measure how good this plan works within this, then it has to be very close to reality. When it comes to learning, we have the unique possibility to actually not do it exactly as it is in reality. We could collaborate more then. It gives us a wider possibility to actually customize the training so it fits to the persons. The only goal we have is to increase learning as much as possible. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree with that. I think we jump very quickly to try and teach and learn based off of scenarios that we can see based in front of us. But we forget the transfer of learning. And we forget that the team or our crisis team is likely to be made up of people with very different skill sets. So we need to find some common ground there. And we need to learn from each other because what's going to make that team strong is understanding each other. So actually taking it out of context and trying to be a bit more neutral is actually a really good way to build those building blocks.
Yeah.
And I would say a more mature organization potentially should be looking at absolutely close to home, what is it going to be? But if we're just getting there, what better way than to break it down and actually make it a little bit more fun as well?
Yeah, indeed. And fun as an exercise leader as well, to not only be stiff into exactly scenario. Okay, so how do we do this? What different type of exercise could we use?
I think that's the question there. So we've spoken a bit about the exercise, the big one, and I'm going to call that full-scale exercising. So we'll keep that one in the back of our mind in a minute. But the first thing really is a walk-through, talk-through, and this is just discussions. Is we can say practice and learning is discussing something, bit like we're doing now, workshopping things over a table. Who do we need? What do we need? Because that in itself is learning. We're bouncing ideas off each other and quite divergent in our thinking here.
Yeah,
we're there. So I think that's the first one really, is just workshopping.
And could be done anywhere also.
Absolutely.
The most simple way could be done over a coffee.
It can be absolutely done over coffee. And I think doing things over a coffee or a brew station is actually a really powerful way to do something.
Yeah.
But then the second one, I'm going to call tabletop. I haven't termed that phrase and I think it's really familiar. There's lots of phrases for it and it doesn't necessarily mean we're sat over a tabletop.
No.
But the traditional terminology or the traditional way of calling it tabletop means we've got our plans out and we're talking through a specific scenario based on what we're doing. It can be very simple to say, this is our scenario, what are we going to do? Right up to full-scale red teaming, where you have people playing the opposition. That could be the disaster management team against a natural disaster, or it could be your security team against a terrorist threat, for example.
Yeah.
But we'll call that red teaming, and I think people will be quite familiar with the terms red teaming.
Of course. So but also with your counterparts, so to speak, or cooperation partners could also be a part of that kind of exercise.
Absolutely,
right?
it's a really good way to introduce people to your ways of working before the full-scale exercise. So tabletopping actually is a really good relationship building tool because you start to talk to each other, understand how things are going. And a tabletop can be done in very, very small pockets and slowly build them up together and to a larger tabletop exercise. So don't think that a tabletop exercise needs to be completely individual. They can be lots of different people exercising at the same time. Bring that all together to a slightly larger tabletop exercise later on in your training program year. Right up then to the full-scale exercise. Now this is what we'll call operational exercising, and this is what I think most people are familiar with. We can often try and run before we can walk, and I think when we get here, this is when we should be comfortable that we've got everything in place, and this is the real test now. And this is the one where we're starting to bring in outside agencies, a lot of the operational parts and working parts to it.
And that's what I think most people kind of think, we're going to do an exercise that will be a full-scale exercise, and not many people use like their training, that tabletop exercises, small kind of training sessions to prepare for the big full-scale exercise. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree, and this turns into the type of practice that we're going to be talking about. So we've got different types, and I think when we think about exercising, we're thinking about one big exercise for the year.
Right.
Now I'm going to call this compound practice. But it's also called massed practice in the sporting world as well. So if we consider someone taking penalties over and over and over again, they're not building variation. They're learning very quickly based off of the unique conditions of that moment in time. But if we spread that learning out, imagine now taking a free kick in football and taking a free kick from different positions at different times of day with different pitch conditions. What you're actually doing is creating some kind of deeper learning. Your motor mechanisms, your motor neurons are adaptive to the stimulus you're seeing in front of you. So when it comes down to building those blocks up, we can consider it like a jigsaw piece. Our exercise is looking at the big piece of the big puzzle at the end. But the type of practice, we need to build up pieces. Whether you build the edges first or whether you aim for a little part of the picture, we're breaking it down into bite-sized pieces. And that's going to increase the depth of our learning, the transfer of our learning, and the longevity of our learning. So we're looking at long-term gains over short-term gains.
And it's an important part, because otherwise I think we would waste a big full-scale exercise if we're not prepared for those penalties or whatever it is. We need to make sure that the basic stuff that we're going to do is already there, right?
Absolutely right. So we need to get those foundations in place. The basic stuff as well won't be there come the next full-scale exercise if we don't reinvigorate that training process. So we can look at the testing part as learning to refeed the training program, if you like, for the next coming year or training cycle, whatever it is in your organization.
But is it possible also to use these kind of tabletops to do a test as well?
Absolutely, because the little components between each part will come together at the final bit. But if we consider that a crisis management is made up of lots of different components, particularly functions, you might want to use the tabletop exercise to test the HR functions. You might want to test the decision maker's ability to chair a meeting. Or you might want to test someone's ability to break down their intent instead of creating direction straight away. So absolutely, little puzzle pieces. And then equally, you can then assure against every department's needs, and you slowly build it up.
That's a good way to put it, indeed. This takes time, it does, really. But how do we motivate ourselves to actually, it costs time and money to do this.
It does cost time and money. A big scale exercise seems in the long run a really good way to start. But giving people small wins regularly is the way we're going to motivate people. And taking ourselves outside of the normal learning environment is something that's going to create those small wins and motivate us to do it. Because we see the why and we've got the big picture. And when we get to the end, we're not creating a position for failure. By building it up, we're actually looking forward to the chance to exercise and learn. The other reason for why is there's second order effects or additional effects. We start to be able to transfer stuff that we're learning through our crisis management into our everyday working. And I think what most organizations will actually see is better collaboration, better ways of working, and a broader mindset of thinking when they come back into their organizational path.
That's a really positive way of putting it. And I've seen the effects myself, so I completely agree about that. Well, that was a short explanation on how to... There is, of course, more to learn about this. But could anyone do this? Could anyone be the exercise leader? What would you say?
I think that's a really good question. I think everyone could be the exercise leader, as long as they've broken it down and understand why. And I think we quite often put people into positions where, because of their job title, we automatically assume they should be the exercise leader. But actually, consider what competence are we trying to build here? And I think we can find that in our team if we just open our eyes and look a bit deeper. What that does, though, is help to build people's confidence and reduce the monotony of the same person teaching all the time, and actually create a dynamic ownership over the final big picture exercise that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So anyone could be.
There's a lot of learning being the exercise leader as well. Sometimes they are the one that learns the most.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into building these things. And actually, if you're uncomfortable are not confident yourself, taking that step to lead it doesn't necessarily put you into a position to be tested and fail, but actually puts you in a position to increase your confidence and demonstrate your capability to your team.
Right. Okay, thank you for a really good introduction in how to practice.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, is there really a need for technical support when you're in a crisis management situation?
I think there is. In this interconnected world, we're operating globally, and we have a lot of interconnected or wider stakeholders. So absolutely, there's a need for some form of technical support as we go forwards in our crisis management.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way we work now as well. We don't sit in the same room anymore, do we?
We don't. So that virtual working environment, or the hybrid working environment, is something that's becoming more familiar to a lot of people now. And it's actually, when we look at the COVID epidemic, for example, there was a need to operate virtually and remotely. So absolutely, when it comes to crisis management, we need a platform that we can use across the globe at the same time.
And what's the requirement of a platform like that? I've heard a lot about different platforms as well. They have been quite complicated to actually maneuver within a crisis. And I see when the crisis really comes, you skip that tool because it's too complicated. So what requirements would you say a system of this?
I absolutely agree with you. There's a lot of products on the market, but they increase complexity when the most important thing is what we need to be doing at that time is reducing complexity and creating simplicity. So we need something easy to operate, usable, user-friendly, easy to operate, and creates a picture in front of us to allow us to start managing ourselves out of crisis, as it were. We want to reduce that complexity. We don't need things to interoperate. We don't need a graph here or something there that confuses us, overstimulates our senses, and actually creates a bit more chaos and ambiguity. So the first thing I'll say is familiarity, simplicity, and usability.
Is that why we want to draw things on a whiteboard, you would say?
Absolutely. We're all familiar with a whiteboard or a blackboard if we're that old and went to school back in the day when there was chalk and pens. But absolutely. A whiteboard in itself creates a simplified picture that we can all see. There's nothing hidden in files somewhere. It's right in front of us. The other good thing about a whiteboard is it's got limited capacity. So if we start putting too much on, we want to start rubbing things out. So it brings us into what is important and helps us focus our mind. If we've got 3 or 4 whiteboards, we actually increase complexity by wanting to fill up that space.
Tell me a little bit more about simplicity, because I think it's so crucial, and we've been talking about that when it comes to plans, when it comes to training, etc. And how does that fit into the system as well, simplicity?
So at Murphy, the number one principle that we work with is simplicity. And I think it's one of the hardest things to do, is to simplify something. So when it comes into simplicity in a platform, it means simplicity in learning how to use it. We don't have time or resources to spend hours and hours or weeks or years, as some organizations do, learning how to use one thing. We don't have time to sit and understand what the picture is in front of us. So when it comes to simplicity, it's how do we present information in such a way that creates understanding very quickly to allow us to organize and then start to lead ourselves out of the crisis.
And understanding is really the key here, right?
Understanding is the key. If we present information simply, and easy to see visually, that means as a group, we're going to start to understand the bigger picture much quicker than if we work in silos or if we start to hide information in amongst lots of things. So keeping that simple, front of house, here it is, I see everything that's going on, that's going to allow us to really build a situational awareness or our operating picture quickly. And
this kind of supports the procedures as well. There are certain things that you need to do during a crisis, right?
There absolutely are, particularly dependent on the type of crisis. So if you're facing a cyber crisis, there might be a lot of very technical tick box things that you need to do. Disconnecting from the internet, for example, in extremis. But you might want to start sandboxing things, right up into communicating early. So within the first 15 minutes, what is my first message? And do we share that message amongst us? That needs to be displayed. What are our lines to take? What am I communicating? Who's responsible for communicating this? But equally, what has happened? What's going on? Because there's going to be a lot of confusion. And if we get that picture in front of us and it's constantly updated, then we're really going to share what's going on, and we're not going to isolate ourselves working in different bits. We can start to bring in all the functions together to manage ourselves out.
Okay, thank you very much for a good explanation of the importance. But in the end, I also want to add, does this replace the whiteboard and pen and paper, you will say?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say it's a complementary factor too. Why? Imagine if I went out and walking in the forest or the hills. I'm an ex-army officer, so I often get lost when I've got a map and a compass. So I've got my GPS, but what happens if that GPS fails? I need to know how to use a map and compass and get myself out. The same goes for leading in a crisis. It's brilliant that we can have this situational awareness in front of us to lead out of crisis, but what happens if that goes down? We're replicating what we see in front of us to the same practices and same processes. It's familiarity in process. By creating that simplicity between a whiteboard and what's in front of us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.